Worry has a clever way of disguising itself. It shows up wearing the mask of responsibility, making you feel like you're being cautious or staying safe. But beneath that mask is fear. Fear rehearsing for events that haven't even taken place, and most of them never will. It's incredible how much time we spend inside our minds, solving imaginary problems, predicting outcomes that haven't happened, scripting conversations that never occur. You lie in bed staring at the ceiling, constructing worst-case scenarios like it's your night shift. You call it being prepared, but in truth, worrying doesn't prepare you. It drains you. It traps you in a cycle where your body thinks it's in danger, even when you're lying in a quiet room. It doesn't make you sharper, more collected, or more ready. It just leaves you worn out. And when you finally take a moment to pause, to breathe, you realize just how much mental space worry was occupying. Thoughts that had no real place in your present were draining your energy. Then you begin to see the pattern, the things that kept you up last month. Half of them didn't even happen. The ones that did, you handled them. Not because you spent days obsessing over them, but because when the moment arrived, you showed up. Worry didn't help you, presence did. And here's the unexpected truth. When you stop worrying, you don't become careless. You become focused. Your energy stops scattering in all directions, chasing infinite what-ifs, and instead begins anchoring itself in the moment that's actually happening. That's where real change begins, not because life suddenly becomes flawless, but because you stop living in a future built entirely on fear. The heaviness starts to fade. You stop gripping so tightly. You allow yourself to breathe again, not because everything is resolved, but because you finally realized you don't need to suffer your way through life to feel secure. When that inner shift occurs, when worry loses its hold, you start to notice everything realigning. What most people don't realize is that worry is the brain's way of trying to feel useful when it's scared. It's a faulty survival instinct scanning for danger, trying to outthink every possibility as if stressing hard enough will somehow prevent bad things from happening. But here's the catch. It's all an illusion of control. Worry gives you the sense that you're doing something, thinking, planning, preparing, but in reality, you're just spinning your wheels. You're mentally circling a problem that doesn't even exist yet. And while you're stuck in that mental maze, life is quietly happening all around you. Moments are slipping by, opportunities are passing unnoticed. Peace, joy, connection, they're all present, but worry blinds you to them. Not because they aren't real, but because your mind is too caught up in what might go wrong to notice what's going right. The real breakthrough happens when you stop asking, what if everything falls apart? And start asking, what if I'm still okay? Even if it does. That single shift in thinking is powerful because real confidence isn't built by avoiding chaos. It's built by walking through it, one steady breath at a time. It's built by recognizing that you can experience discomfort without collapsing, that you can face not knowing without losing your sense of self, that you don't need to have all the answers to be okay. You just need to be present enough to receive them when they come. When you stop feeding the worry, you stop needing to predict every step. You begin to respond instead of react. You start to trust that whatever shows up, you'll handle it, not flawlessly, not with a perfect strategy, but with calm, clarity, and presence. And when that happens, life moves differently. Conversations feel lighter, decisions become cleaner, even mistakes lose their sting because you stop interpreting them as evidence that everything is unraveling. You stop reacting from fear and start acting from peace. People notice your energy shifts. You're no longer broadcasting anxiety through your tone, your eyes, your movements. You slow down, not out of hesitation, but out of intention. You speak less, but your words carry more weight. You stop micromanaging every little detail and become the kind of person who doesn't need to, because your presence alone communicates strength. That's when your world begins to respond differently, not because you manipulated it into submission, but because you stopped resisting it with fear. Here's something that might sting a little. Many of the problems you believe you have aren't actually real. They're mental stories woven by worry. You're not always overwhelmed by your circumstances. You're overwhelmed by the meaning you've attached to them, the future outcomes you've invented, the false certainty you've created around what might go wrong. Worry has a way of turning simple things into monsters. A single unread message becomes proof that someone's upset with you. A few quiet hours turn into evidence that you're falling behind. One unexpected event, and suddenly your entire day feels like it's spiraling. But what if you didn't add meaning? What if you didn't rush to conclusions or assume the worst? What if you allowed things to simply be without labeling them as negative, personal, or permanent? That's where life begins to feel lighter. Not because you've gained control, but because you've stopped painting everything with the color of fear. When you stop telling yourself a frightening story about every uncertain moment, you start to experience the moment itself without the distortion. One of the most liberating things you can do is stop narrating your life through the lens of anxiety. You don't need to overanalyze every possibility. You don't need to mentally prepare for disaster. You don't need to brace for every potential storm. In fact, the most grounded people you'll ever meet are often the ones who seem almost unnervingly calm in the middle of chaos, not because they've mastered life, but because they've stopped letting their minds turn every unknown into a threat. They've learned a simple truth. The mind isn't supposed to control the future. It's supposed to show up for the present. Ironically, when you stop obsessing over what might happen, you finally create space to engage with what is happening. That's where your power lives. That's where growth takes root. You begin to handle life in real time, not in mental rehearsal. Your decisions become clearer because they're not clouded by fear. You take better care of your body because your energy isn't being consumed by imagined crises. You show up in your relationships more fully because you're no longer stuck in mental loops of guilt and doubt. Worry feeds off imagined futures, but peace, the deep kind, lives in them now. And the more often you let yourself feel that peace, even for a few minutes at a time, the more you realize something profound. Your outer world didn't change. You changed, and the world responded to that. There's a quiet superpower most people overlook, the ability to leave things unresolved, to resist the urge to force answers, to sit in the not knowing without panic, to move forward without having everything neatly wrapped up. Because life doesn't unfold like a perfect screenplay. It's messy, layered, often unclear. And sometimes, the wisest thing you can do is wait, without fear. That's hard, especially when your mind has been trained to fill every silence with worry. But once you begin to notice that urge, the need to fix, to solve, to prepare, you also gain the power to pause, to ask, why am I rushing? What am I so afraid will happen if I simply stay here a little longer? Who told me that peace only comes after everything is figured out? Worry tries to convince you that peace must be earned after all the chaos is gone. But that's a trap. If you keep waiting for everything to feel right before you exhale, you'll spend your whole life holding your breath. Real peace, the kind that can hold steady even in the storm, doesn't come from mastering every detail. It comes from choosing to separate your emotional state from your external circumstances. From staying anchored when things are unresolved, unfinished, unclear, and still refusing to be thrown off center by them. That's when life begins to change, not just on the outside, but from within. Once worry loosens its grip, you regain access to your energy, your creativity, your natural rhythm. Things begin to feel more fluid, not because you've manipulated them, but because you've stopped resisting them. You start moving with life, not against it. The situation might stay the same, but you feel different inside it. More rooted, more spacious, less desperate for answers, more available for possibility. and things start to fall into place, not because you forced them, but because you finally stopped pushing so hard. You started trusting your own stillness. Most people never pause to ask why their minds are constantly racing. They simply assume it's normal, like background noise that never quiets down. But here's a truth that's rarely spoken. A busy mind isn't necessarily a strong one. More often, it's a mind conditioned to survive, not to live. We've learned to equate anxiety with ambition. We've mistaken restlessness for productivity. Somewhere along the way, we began to believe that constant thinking equals progress. But overthinking doesn't mean you're evolving. It usually means your nervous system is trapped in a cycle, replaying old fears, wearing new costumes. Worry gives you the illusion that you're participating in life, that you're doing something, but what you're actually doing is standing on the sidelines, trying to control every possible outcome with your thoughts, while the real moment slips through your fingers. You don't experience the sunset because your mind is still checking off tomorrow's to-do list. You don't hear what someone's saying because your brain is already planning your reply. You're physically present, but not truly there. And yet change doesn't have to come from force. It begins with awareness. The moment you start catching yourself mid-worry, not judging, just noticing, you reclaim a part of yourself. You pause, you breathe, you tell yourself, this isn't happening right now. This is a mental story, and I can close the chapter whenever I choose. That's when you start returning to your body. You feel your feet on the floor. You notice your breath rising and falling. You realize your chest loosens slightly when you stop feeding the panic. You re-enter your life, not as a character struggling through the script, but as the one writing it, one conscious sentence at a time. Here's the key: you can't worry your way into a peaceful future, but you can choose peace now, not as a grand destination, but as a recurring decision. And the more you make that choice, even in small, quiet ways, the more you strengthen that inner muscle. Over time, it becomes easier to come back to yourself, even when the noise of the world gets louder. One of the most hidden truths about worry is that it's addictive, not because it feels good, but because it creates the illusion of control. It gives your mind something to chew on, something to fixate. Unlike busy work for the soul, it makes you feel like you're doing something, even if that something is draining you. And that distraction comes with a price. It doesn't always steal your peace in dramatic ways. Often, it does so subtly, like a gentle hum in the background. You're laughing, but part of your brain is still stuck in an imaginary problem. You're trying to enjoy the moment, but a quiet whisper inside keeps asking, "What if?" Without realizing it, you build your inner world around preparing for disasters that haven't arrived and may never come. You spend your energy bracing instead of being. But here's the shift. When you recognize the spiral and choose not to feed it, something changes. You begin retraining your nervous system. You start teaching your body what safety feels like. Even when nothing is certain, you begin to understand that safety isn't something you'll finally earn once life cooperates. It's something you cultivate moment by moment, by not treating uncertainty as a threat. You don't need to have everything figured out. You just need to stop mistaking your thoughts for truths. Just because a fear shows up doesn't make it real. Just because something could happen doesn't mean it deserves your peace. And no, this doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start caring more wisely. You begin protecting your energy like it's sacred, because it is. You treat your attention like the precious resource it is. You stop giving the loudest thought in your mind all the power and start listening for the quieter one, the one that whispers, "You're safe right now." And that's when something beautiful happens. Your intuition begins to rise. You start feeling what's right for you without needing to run every detail through a mental committee. You take action without over-explaining. You let go of deadlines and begin trusting divine timing. The world around you might not slow down, but you do. And in that stillness, you find something that doesn't have to shout to be powerful: inner strength, calm resilience. A kind of groundedness that holds firm even when everything else feels chaotic. A quiet mind is rare, not because life is perfect, but because that mind has stopped being at war with itself. That kind of peace doesn't come from controlling every variable. It comes from releasing the ones that were never yours to hold in the first place. What's weighing you down might not be the challenges in front of you, but the stories your mind tells about them. The assumptions, the imaginary catastrophes, the silent pressure to meet invisible standards you never agreed to. The truth is, most of what's making your days feel heavy isn't actually yours to carry. You don't need to solve every problem. Before you can exhale, you don't have to anticipate every outcome before you allow yourself to rest. The real shift begins when you notice your mind trying to pull you into fear, and you choose not to follow. That single choice, repeated over and over, is where your power lives. This isn't about becoming passive. It's about loosening the grip. It's about walking through life with open hands, not clenched fists. It's about being present without panicking, grounded without controlling. Because life begins to respond differently when your energy shifts. You'll feel it. Others will feel it too. And no, it's not magic. It's not some mystical transformation. It's simply you, finally showing up as yourself, not a future version of you, not the over-polished, over-prepared version, just the real present you, the one who knows that whatever happens next, you'll meet it when it arrives, not a moment sooner, not a breath too early, and maybe, just maybe, everything starts to fall into place. Not because life suddenly became easier, but because you stopped making it harder than it needed to be. You stopped adding fear to silence. You stopped adding stress to uncertainty. You stopped letting your imagination be hijacked by fear. If this message reaches you in the right moment, take a second to let it settle. Not for the algorithm, not for anyone else, but for you. Let this be a reminder. You're not here to overthink your way through life. You're here to live it, fully, gently, bravely, and that includes making space for peace, not later, not after the next crisis, but now. Every time you step back from worry, you're telling your nervous system a different story, one of safety, one of self-trust, one of presence. You're teaching yourself that uncertainty isn't a threat, it's just a space you haven't filled with meaning yet. You're proving to yourself that not knowing isn't dangerous. It's spacious. It's where creativity is born. It's where you meet your intuition. You begin to realize that real peace doesn't arrive when every question is answered. It arrives when you stop demanding that everything makes sense. It comes when you allow life to unfold on its own terms and choose to stay centered even when things feel unfinished. Because life will always feel unfinished. That's part of its rhythm. So what if you stopped chasing closure? What if you didn't need to have everything wrapped up before you moved forward? What if you trusted that the next step will appear when it's time, not because you've worried hard enough, but because you're paying attention? When you begin to live from that space, you start to move differently. You no longer need to explain your peace. You no longer feel guilty for slowing down. You no longer look for permission to rest. You simply rest. You simply choose clarity over chaos, breath over pressure, presence over performance. And that choice, it compounds. It builds strength in quiet ways. It shapes the way you speak to yourself. It influences the way you show up in relationships. It deepens your connection with your body, with the present moment, with your own truth. It's a shift that doesn't require dramatic action, only consistent attention. Because when your peace no longer depends on the outcome, you become unshakable. Not because nothing affects you, but because you no longer collapse every time life gets messy. You stop waiting for external permission to feel okay. You give yourself that permission. Now, without needing to fix anything first. That's what real empowerment looks like. It's not loud. It's not flashy. It's quiet, grounded, rooted in your ability to choose your focus, even when the world demands you scatter it. And once you've tasted that kind of inner steadiness, you won't want to trade it for anything. You'll become more discerning with your energy, more protective of your inner world, more selective about which thoughts deserve your attention and which can simply pass by like clouds in the sky. You'll begin to recognize the cost of worry, not just in terms of stress, but in terms of what it robs from your life, the moments you missed, the peace you postponed, the joy you delayed, waiting for everything to feel safe. But the truth is, safety isn't found in perfection. It's found in presence, in breathing through the unknown, in remembering that right now, in this very moment, you are okay, and that's enough. So next time your mind tries to drag you into another what-if storm, gently remind yourself, I don't need to go there. I can choose something else. I can choose to stay here, in this moment where life is still happening. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to stop feeding the fear. You don't need to control everything. You just need to stop resisting what is. You don't need to know what's coming. You just need to trust that you'll meet it when it does. And maybe, just maybe, things start falling into place. Not because life became easier, but because you stopped pushing against it so hard. If these words landed at the right time, take a moment, breathe, reflect, and share this space with someone who needs it too. Not for views, not for numbers, but to stay aligned with the version of you that chooses presence over panic. You're not here to overthink every step. You're here to feel your way forward, to live fully, gently, and awake. Let's keep showing up together.